So, what is your advice to parents that are struggling now and not sure what to do and just really at a loss?
So I think that trying a variety of strategies is a great starting point to figure out what works for your child and what is less successful. So, the verbal intermediary for us, that was never so successful. She did it sometimes. Sometimes it would help her in the school setting. Mostly she used it, once she developed a friendship with a couple of peers, she used it as a way to get her needs met. So if she needed more milk, she would go to her peer next to her and say, "Hey, could you ask the teacher for more milk? Could you tell them that I need more milk?" And they would raise their hand and, ask the teacher for something else to drink. But it was never really like something that she grasped onto. What did work for us was the visuals. So, this would be the script writing for older kids. For her, because she wasn't a reader yet, I would just create, drawings. And we would go out to a restaurant or we would go out to a store. I know you always say same one or two restaurants, same one or two stores. So our store was Target, and I would create a list of, three things. I wouldn't give her the whole grocery list. I would just say, here are the three things that we need. And one of those things was always something for her. So she was, motivated, right? So I would say, okay, we need mouthwash, we need tissues, and then we're going to get you a toy. And I'm going around the store. I'm like, I just cannot find mouthwash, right? So I said, Olive, we got to find somebody to help us find this thing. And then we're going to get to the toys. So the faster we can find this, the faster we're going to get to the toys. So I would find an employee. I would say, excuse me, could you help us with something? Olive, what is it that we were looking for? And sometimes, especially in the beginning, she wouldn't say anything, deer in headlights. So I would bridge down. It was the second thing on the list. What was that thing? Still nothing. Was it mouthwash or was it hand soap? Or was it hand soap or mouthwash? And she would say mouthwash really, really quietly, right? But the benefit that we had with the visuals is the store employee sees a giant visual of mouthwash on the piece of paper. So even if they didn't hear her, I would say, "Did you get that?" And they would say, "Mouthwash? Sure." And I think that started giving her confidence because I think she felt like, oh man, that worked. Like they heard me, you know? They probably didn't hear her. They were looking at the list, but she didn't know that. So they would help us find mouthwash and then we would get to the toy. Also at Target, we would always get a cake pop at Starbucks, and I had a little visual of a cake pop so that she could place her order. And it was the same situation. Even if she said it very quietly, they could see the visual. They knew she wanted a pink cake pop. And it was repetition, repetition, repetition. We did that once a week, every week for probably a year. And it was the same thing with the restaurant. We are so lucky. We live in the city. We're right across the street from a restaurant. And it was summertime when we first were engaged with the Smart Center. They have a great patio space. And she loved this place. Best burger in town for her. And they had toys for the kids, like action figures, and sidewalk chalk. So we could sit on their little patio area with sidewalk chalk and toys and burger and fries. I mean, that's a great evening for a kid. So that was, an incentive for her as well. She liked that place. So I would go and I would have my visual menu of what she could order. And again, it started slow at first. She would just point to the visuals. And I would say, okay, what is this that you're pointing to? Cheeseburger. What is this that you're pointing to? French fries. And we went there all the time, all the time, all the time, to the point where we don't need the visuals anymore. She's just telling the server this is her order. And we were also regulars. That helped. We knew all the staff. So she was building comfort, with these familiar faces. And it was the same deal with the toys. I want to play with the toys. And I'd say, oh, okay, let's ask our server, Julie. So we would go over to Julie. I would say, Julie, Olive has a question. What was your question? Nothing. Did you want to play with the toys, the sidewalk chalk, or both? Both. And Julie would say, oh, of course, I can get those for you. And she would bring them out for Olive. So anyway, in terms of advice, your original question, I think it's finding what works for your child, making sure that they're interested and invested in the places that you're going to practice, and then repetition. you got to just kind of beat them over the head with it. Like, because what happens is the more you do it, of course, the less scary it is. And we got to a point with Olive that she's bored with it. It's like, oh my God, mom. So I'll go out to Target. I still do it with her. I'll say, excuse me, can you help us find something? Oh, what was it that we needed? She's like, batteries. The employee's like, oh, sure, batteries. Here's where they are. She's like, come on, mom. Like, you don't know where this stuff is by now? Like, we've done this a million times. So I think that repetition aspect is so important, and to really be like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like tenacious,
Yeah.
with practicing.
No, thank you for sharing that. And, some children, when they're 4 or 5, can use the bridge as a game. So the give my order game, the store game, whatever you want to call it, and showing them where they are on the bridge. And some kids need external motivation. So they get more stickers for this or more stickers for that. And the use of the verbal intermediary for me, just to clarify, is when a teacher asks a question, for example, do you want the red or the blue? They focus on another child first because that decreases expectations. You want the red or the blue? Turns to Olive. What color do you want? Do you want the red or the blue or the green? And she doesn't answer. It's like red, blue, or green. Tell Rebecca. So the teacher prompts the use. I'm not a big advocate of just go up to your friend, tell them something, then your friend gets up across the room and tells the teacher. The point for me of a verbal intermediary is the child is using their words in relation to that person's question, which is the SM triangle. And I'll put that as a resource in the podcast. But the SM triangle link the person asking questions with the person they're comfortable with. So, but you were doing that successfully in stores and restaurants. You were that intermediary. So you gave her the opportunity, stage 3. You even said, what are we looking for? Open-ended, thought-provoking question, but you had the visual. Because remember, the visual you see, the choices you hear, that minimizes their need to think and process. And every time you repeat it, it helps them ingrain that more. So it gets a quicker response, less of a warm up, less of a response time. And so when she didn't answer to what do we want, you went down to a bridge with to a choice with the right answer second. So that was the last thing she heard. So that let her hear the answer without, it's kind of like a cheat sheet. Yes. Seeing the visual and hearing the choice is a cheat sheet. So what I love about that is that you were doing that, and you as a parent were using those strategies to progress her. So she heard herself, she saw herself, she realized she could do it. And you didn't necessarily use the bridge to show her, but it worked for her, and that's okay. Like whatever you were doing with all these things, it was amazingly strategic on your end. And that's the same things that teachers need to do. They need to have specific skills that they use with that child in the classroom, not what they did with another child with SM necessarily. I'm sure there's some overlap, but for a child like Olive and her presentation, that teacher, and I'm sure that's what happened, the tools you gave them, had school, trainings, they had to do it too, because you cannot rely on a child that goes to Communicamp or any of the intensive programs or an individual intensive or treatment just to be like, okay, mom and dad step back, teachers step back, and the child's going to go into that environment and be able to do it all the time. Yep. It's about training you as parents, training teachers, educating others on what can you do to facilitate those strategies to bring success to your child. And that's exactly, Mindy, you did it. Every now and then you get a family that comes to session and they're like, we didn't get to do anything the last month. We didn't. And so what I'm thinking is, wait, we need to step back. There had to be some opportunity, unless you were locked in your home. And even then you could have had people over, right? You have to do the work.
Yes.
You have to do it. The only way a child is going to overcome this, the only way a child is going to build the skills is through exposure, and more exposure. And that's what you did. And all of the real world things that you're sharing with me, what that does is it stimulates the social communication pathways. She's interacting with people she doesn't know. She's using her words towards adults, new people, new experiences. That carries over into school.
Yes.
So for parents that are like, we just need help with school, well, that's not realistic. You need help in all aspects of your life. Unless you're a speech phobic, which wouldn't be a child your child's age, and they're 8 years old, 10 years old, and they're stuck only in school, that's different. That's a whole different strategy bag of tricks. But in your case, and in a very typical, more SM 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 4-year-old, you did it. And that's why your child overcame this quickly. And this is why your child's thriving. And you still have those skills. You're still pulling them out.
I just used them the other day. We were at Chick-fil-A And for whatever reason, I don't know, maybe she didn't like the look of the cashier. I don't know. He was like a tall, burly guy, so maybe she was a little
Oh,
intimidated. I had to say, "Do you want chicken strips or chicken nuggets?" And that's okay.
that's
Like I
totally
said,
fine.
we have the tools. And then the school part of it was also huge. We really had to build a trusting relationship with the staff at preschool. And we had lots of calls where I could pass along some of the strategies that we learned from the Smart Center, things that they could try out, and also a call with Jen Brittingham to provide them some additional education. And we were lucky that they were very receptive. And, there were some accommodations that they couldn't really help us with just because of the rules of the facility, and also it was still COVID time, so they were really strict about parents coming into the facility, that sort of thing. But where they could help, they would. And that's another big reason why she made progress, because they were on board in helping us, and some of the strategies were like wild. I think I mentioned at a parent panel, she was frozen for a while at school. When she first walked in, all the kids are expected to go to the sink and wash their hands. That's the first thing they're expected to do after they put their backpacks in their cubby. And she was just frozen. She just could not get to the sink to wash her hands. She would just stand in front of her cubby. And I don't mean to laugh, but it's kind of a funny visual looking back on it now. At the time, it was very stressful. So, we were talking with the teachers, like, how can we help her with this hand washing thing? And I said, what? Obviously, this is an area of stress. I think it has something to do with the fact that you're kind of bombarding her with a demand when she first walks in the door. And what we know, look, listen, and learn, is that she needs time to warm up. So for a little while, can we just give her a little squirt of Purell, and see how we do with that? And then once she has a little bit of a break with just Purell, which I think will be, feasible for her at this moment, maybe we can revisit the hand washing. So that's what we did at first. So then she's doing well with, kind of a decrease of warm up time. She gets her Purell, she goes and sits down at her spot and has her breakfast. So I thought, let's try the hand washing again. So they say, hey, today, Olive, we're going to be washing hands. We're all out of Purell. And she goes to the sink and she's frozen again. So I'm thinking, what can we do? We need to find a way to take the pressure off of her, because for some reason she feels like there's pressure behind this request. She feels like she's in the spotlight. So I sent her into school with a rubber ball,
Mm.
and I made up a whole story. This rubber ball is really naughty because it gets dirty every night when you're not looking. And so I want you to take this into school. You need to give this ball a good wash because it was really naughty overnight. Wash the ball and then put it back in your cubby. And she started calling it her cheeky ball because we were watching a lot of Bluey, and they say cheeky all the time. So that worked. She went to the sink, she washed her ball, thereby washing her hands, put it in her cubby, no problem. And so it was an inanimate object that she could put the attention towards. The
Yes,
attention was now on the inanimate object, it wasn't on her.
yes,
And then we were able to kind of, get away from the ball. So we started using the ball only in the mornings, not after going to the bathroom, for instance. And then a couple mornings, oh, Olive, I'm so sorry. I forgot to pack your cheeky ball. I didn't forget. I intentionally didn't pack it, until eventually we phased out the ball and she was able to wash her hands. So anyway, why, you know, things that, you would never think could help. Like, we're trying to think outside the box, and we're working with our teachers, like, hey, is this okay to try? They're like, yeah, we'll try it. It was that type of stuff that we really had to get creative with.
yeah, no. And I think this podcast is going to be wonderful for parents because what they're going to hear from you is listen to the creativity this mom did. And I can do that too.
Mhm.
And she didn't get defeated. She just was like, okay, 2 steps back, once, 3 steps forward, and look at you. So you are truly an inspiration. And this is why, it's just so wonderful that you're on here sharing your experience, because the goal is to give families hope. The goal is that kids don't need to stay selectively mute. They don't need to stay shut down.